Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. In this episode, we have a call from Evil Jeff, talk a little more about quicker combat from last episode, and of course, more tales from the Dragon Slayers.
Phantom, Evil Jeff. All right, so that latest podcast got me really thinking, and it's got me curious because I want to know exactly how you're going to distill all that down. Because you started talking, and I got this vision of you heading back to the wargaming roots of the hobby, and really, being persnickety about the different types of armor and weapons. I mean, that's where you were heading in my head. But then when you got to trying to simplify it down, realize that you were just trying to find some sort of mathematical formula that would allow you to distill it down to two numbers probably, and then maybe some sort of code that then allows you to be effective with that. So yeah, I'm curious to see what you end up coming up with. I can't envision in my head. I don't feel like doing the math on it right now, but it sounds like an interesting little side project there. Good stuff. Later.
Thank you, Jeff, for the call in. Yeah, you've got it right. I had listened when listening to the Halberds and Helmets, Alex Schrober's Halberds and Helmets podcast, and he was talking about wanting to give the various types of armor, light, heavy, and medium, a way to be incorporated in a more simplified combat system. He wanted a quicker combat system, and that got me thinking of the idea of, from later versions of D&D, the types of damage attributed mainly to weapons, 3 types of damage: bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing. And then the idea from early parts of AD&D of weapons versus armor, and having it's almost a rock paper scissors thing, where you have the 3 types of armor and the 3 types of damage, and one of the types of damage is more effective against each type of armor. And then, of course, making it more complicated, as I tend to do, saying pole arms will give you a little extra damage on top of that because you've got more leverage. And I think it's, it sounds like it's getting away from the simplified combat, but I view simplified combat through a couple of lenses. And I think in this case, I think you can take a lot of the complexity out with sort of pre-calculation. It would be something on a character sheet where you would have your weapons. And again, I think what Alex was getting after in his podcast was not going with lots of amounts of hit points and things like that, and just being more about being able to take a handful of hits, and then you've either got to withdraw, or you're done, or you've won, or whatever is going on there. And so that is kind of getting back to the wargaming roots, where you're not talking about hit points anymore. You're talking about hits. You can take a certain number of hits. And in my mind, that would be adjudicated by really an ability score. In D&D, the obvious one would be Constitution. Because if you run out of Constitution or stamina or endurance, whatever you want to call it, then you just can't go on anymore. But again, if you're trying to get to the root of what Alex was getting to, was a combat is not going to take as long. You don't even want necessarily to have that 3d6 where you're getting into double digits, unless you just rolled really high. So I was thinking maybe a 2d6 system. So there's a lot of moving parts in my head about ability scores and how that's going to relate to combat. And I'm still kind of working it up, but I think it's going to work out to where you have a character sheet where it has, okay, here's your ability scores, and here's your armor, and you've got medium armor on, so you've got 4 boxes before that armor stops being effective and the hits start affecting you, kind of thing, and then the weapon types would just be, it could be something in the corner, or it could just be you know uh, where your weapons are written down. You know, this weapon is a bludgeoning weapon, and it's plus one hit to uh, medium type of armor, that kind of thing. So it would basically be the only thing you'd be rolling in combat would be to hit, because again, in my mind, that would be relating back to ability scores, some kind of dexterity score, agility score, dodge score, which would indicate whether an opponent could get a hit on you or not, and then it would be a matter of weapon versus armor versus hits, whether the damage that the weapon does is done to the armor or done to yourself, or to the character rather, not to yourself. So I've actually sat down a couple of times since then and made a fair amount of notes here and there about where I think this is going. So I think it's going to be about the ability scores and the weapons versus armor, and then it's just about the armor is going to take a certain number of hits, and then it's going to start weighing on the character, and eventually the character just can't go anymore. So I'm probably going to try to rig something up that's just combat and just run through it with some dice and throw some groups of creatures and characters and stuff against each other and see how that works before I look to say, okay, if we go to this in a fantasy setting, how will that affect in terms of how will spells work that do damage, and what other things can be brought to play. Again, not to give it a lot of complexity, because again, the root idea behind this that I drew from that podcast was quicker combat, but something that does give some choices and some alternatives, and you have interesting decisions to make that can affect how combat goes. So I hope that cleared things up a little more. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it's a muddle still. But thank you again for leaving me that message. Now, expanding on what I said in part of my response to Evil Jeff's message, I talked about I view complexity in combat as a couple of different things, because there's a lot of complaints, particularly more modern iterations of D&D, and really in a lot of fantasy role playing games, about how long combat takes, and how it's just piles of hit points and you're banging on each other with piles of hit points. And I've listened to some live plays of 5e, and the combats do seem to take a while. Sometimes they take whole episodes and then lurk into the next episodes, and maybe even 2 episodes depending on the combat. But what I hear is not necessarily that it's the piles of hit points that are the problem. Now, it can be if you roll poorly, but I mean, 5th edition D&D characters can put out some tremendous damage even at low to moderate levels when they know what they're doing. And I think that's where a lot of the slowness of combat comes from, is there's a lot to choose from. 5th edition gives, even in the early levels, a lot of options to characters. And, whether you're talking about spells, whether you're talking about class abilities, subclass abilities, just a lot of options of how to affect combat, whether they're wanting to do damage to opponents, or whether they're wanting to help one of their teammates, whether they want to do some healing if they have healing ability. And that's been added to the fact that there's a lot of crossover, and what I personally consider muddling in 5th edition of character not character class roles, because almost every class has a subclass that lets them cast spells, and then when you add that to class abilities, other subclass abilities, uh, actions, bonus actions, reactions. There's a lot of moving parts, particularly in combat, because a lot of this is still based on a war game. There's a lot more emphasis and stuff put on the combat aspects than the non-combat aspects, so, in my opinion, in pretty much any version of D&D you want to look at, and even uh, uh, games that are just inspired of D&D or D&D adjacent or D&D like, Pathfinder, DCC, what have you. And I think it's this complexity which extends at almost an exponential rate as you get higher and higher in levels that really just kind of slows combat to a crawl. Because if you don't have, system, we talk about system mastery a lot in you hear in the old school uh, gaming circles talking about system mastery. If you don't have that mastery of what your character can do, then you're gonna find yourself in a quandary. You're gonna find yourself in that deer in headlights look when it's your turn in the combat round. And then after that, there's the rolling. You have hit rolls, you have damage rolls, you have sometimes there's saving throws involved. There may be some other kind of roll involved, some kind of check you're doing so that you can do what you want to do, or some kind of check for the opponent to do so that maybe you can't do what you're going to do. And then again, if you're not rolling well, there is the bag o hit points problem where characters are very strong, and as a result, the creatures have to be very strong as well to be able to, put up a fight. And then even beyond that, even beyond all those decisions you have to make at the character level and the bag of hit points of individual characters, individual creatures, on top of that, you have the party level decision making, the party level, how are we moving around the battlefield, to get things like advantage for flanking or being on opposite sides of each other, depending on what version you're using. So what I'm looking to do here, again, this is inspired by Alex Schrader's Halberds and Helmets podcast, one of his recent episodes where he was talking about for maybe 5 minutes adding what armor and shields mean in a sort of a lighter combat scenario where you're trying to keep things moving. We're trying to have combat, have interesting choices, but then resolve it and move on and not have it take an entire session. So my idea was to make it so that your choices and your calculations are already factored into your character sheet. You're gonna roll a die and you're gonna see what happens, and then the other guys go roll a die and see what happens, and you're going to have some choices to make within that character sheet that can help shift things one way or the other. But it shouldn't be an algebra problem, or it shouldn't be just this overwhelming number of things you can bring to bear, where you have interesting choices, you have a role to play, but it's not something that's gonna eat up a lot of mental space in terms of calculation and picking what you're going to do, but it's going to be a matter of making those more interesting decisions that are strategic tactical decisions on the battlefield. So that's where I'm trying to go with this. We'll see what it comes up with. I'll probably talk about this again at some point, and maybe I can put something coherent together and throw it up on my blog. And if I do, I will let you know. I will link it in the show notes. Yeah, I think I'm going to wrap up this part of the podcast right here and move on to. And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. Getting back to the creatures trying to get out of the river keep or trying to get up into the upper levels of the river keep, where some of the party's troops and some of the fort troops are holding down to keep in protecting the road. One mistake I did make in the previous iteration was I ended that day too soon. There were actually a couple more potential encounters for that day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll those over one to the next day. So each of the next 2 days, instead of having 3, they had rolled up as potentially having 3 encounters. Could potentially have 4 encounters. But I do need to roll up when the 4th encounter will take place. I know one will be in the 4th hour, one in the 17th hour, and one in the 23rd hour of day 116. So when will the 4th one potentially take place? The 10th hour. So we've got 4 potential encounters if they can get through the barriers. And I'm just going to roll to see which one of the 4 we'll get. And number 4, that is potentially fire bats. So these are small creatures. They are semi-intelligent. So we need to roll to see which one of these barriers are going to try to get through, because 2 of the barriers were built by large creatures, and they're not going to be very effective against small creatures, so they'll get an advantage trying to get through those. Roll number 3, that is one that has been improved upon by the troops, so it will be effective against these creatures. Now, fire bats are 2 hit dice creatures. As I said before, they're small, they're semi-intelligence, so that's going to give them a D6 to get through, and the level of this barrier is 6, so they're going to need to roll a 6 to get through. And with a 4, they just can't get through, so they're still back in the second level of the dungeon, and they won't be able to get through here. So the hour 10 encounter, this again will be while the troops are still active, so we'll roll to see which of the 3 it'll be. It'll be the first one. So this is going to be one carried over from the previous day. This is 7 lizard men. They are medium-sized. They're hit die 2+1. They are low intelligence. That's going to give them an 8+1. So the roll a D10 and get them, and subtract 1 from that. Which of the directions they're coming from number 1, that is a 5 rating. So we're rolling a D10 minus 1. They roll a 9 minus 1. So that gives them an 8. So they're going to get through this barrier and lower it by 3. So that's a very weak barrier now. And so we will have 7 lizard men coming up and catching some of our troops, plus the party members of the party that they discovered that had come through earlier. So let's roll for surprise. Are the troops and their allies surprised? On a 4, they are not. The lizard men, on a 1, they are. So that's going to be 1 surprise segment. So since these are intelligent creatures, there will be a chance to parlay, perhaps. And so I'm going to rule that the party is going to, since it's a lawful good party, they're going to use that surprise segment to try to parlay. So instead of just immediately moving into combat, first let's see if this is kind of the lizard man home, if they have a home on one of the lower levels somewhere. 30% chance, and with a 6%, it is. So it's a home. So I'm going to rule that gives them a more negative reaction to the encounter, because they view this as their home. They need to be able to get out. They need to be able to forage, and they're less likely to want to move. And because they are neutral, there will be and there is going to be a minus 15% on this roll because of differences in alignment. And we'll let's see. I got to see if does the paladin have a charisma bonus? I'm sure he does. Yeah, the paladin has a plus 30% charisma bonus, so this will be plus 15% to this die roll overall. And they got an 89, so plus 15%. That's going to put it well over 100. It's enthusiastic, it's friendly, it's immediate acceptance. So in this circumstance, what I'm going to rule that means is that they do agree to move their home, that they recognize that these troops are going to be here. They're here to stay. They're here to protect the road. And that in addition, to doing that, they're going to enter into an alliance as far as the party is concerned. Since the party's going to be there for a few days, they're going to agree to leave some warriors behind to help protect the road, but they will move out of the this fort, this keep, this guard post / dungeon, and that'll take most of the day for them to get organized, get out of there. So they will have, but that will put them out probably by the time the next encounter comes through, which is 7 hours later. And they'll also help repair kind of the corridor they came down, the barriers between that to help prevent creatures from coming through. So since these are medium creatures, well, it's basically the same building as they were trying to break through, more or less. So we're going to be rolling that D10 -1. And they rolled a 7, so that's a 6. So that barrier is going to have a 6 as far as medium creatures building it, and then it's still got the 2 left over from where the large creatures build. So it'll be a little more effective against larger creatures, a little less effective, a little more effective against against larger creatures, medium creatures, and small creatures. But the really large creatures, if something tries to come through, it'll just have that 2. So the third encounter of the day, and there's only a couple of them left, so we're going to go 1, 2, or 3, 4. With the 3, we're getting 1 ice troll. So which entryway will they be approaching from? Number 2, which is a 4, but built by medium creatures. It's one that had been completely cleared out when the Hydra came crashing through, as we had in the last episode. Now, ice trolls are only 2 hit dice creatures, and they are semi-intelligent. And it's just 1 creature, but it is a large creature. So all that's going to add up to giving them a D8 to get through this barrier. And with a 2, just barely makes it through the barrier, just kind of pushes his way through. Doesn't do any additional damage to the barrier. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry, that was a 4. He needed a 4 to get through, didn't get through the barrier. And so this ice troll will just kind of go back into the dungeon looking for another way out. Which leaves us to the wee hours of the morning when the final potential encounter takes place. These are 2 Ankhegs. Now, these are burrowers, so I'm going to say that this gives them a +2 to their roll when they're trying to get through the barrier. So let's see which barrier they're trying to get through. And it's barrier number 3. That is the strongest barrier. So they are a large creature. They are considered non-intelligent. Is that right? So non-intelligent. So so that's a 1. That's the lowest on the scales of intelligence. They are large creatures. So that's a 3. And their hit dice are 7. So that's a D10. So a D10 rolling, trying to get through a barrier of a 6. And they also have there's also a 5 barrier there built by large creatures. The medium creature was 6, but since they're just on the smaller side of large, they'll be going up against the 6 because there's some additional sort of large creature structure in there. We'll give it it's a 6 because the 6 is above the 5. So they're rolling a D10, but they are at -2 on this. I mean, +2 on this because they're a burrowing type creature. So they rolled a 3 +2 is 5. So they don't get through. They tunnel up. They find a tangle of timbers and stone, and they simply can't get through. So they also retreat. So the garrison at this keep had a very good day. They made friends with some lizard men that managed to get through, and then they avoided encounters because they simply couldn't get through the barriers around them. And that will continue on to the next day. So now let's look ahead to the next day. We have 4 potential encounters. Let's see what times of day this will be. The 11th hour, the 23rd hour again, the 24th hour, and then the 12th hour. So these are all later in the day. So 11, 12, 23, and 24. So let's see what kind of improvements are made by the troops on the barriers. So they know that one barrier is a little weaker than the others. So they're going to try to increase that. And they're all going to put their effort into that. So with the help of the party kind of helping out there, that's going to give them a, let's see, average intelligence, medium-sized creatures, 1 hit die for the troops, and then plus aid. That's going to give them a D10. So they're going to try to increase this barrier, which is currently at a 4. And they rolled a 1. So they weren't able to make any improvements on that particular barrier. They moved some stuff around. They tried to pack it a little tighter for smaller creatures, brace it a little better, but they just couldn't improve upon what they already had there. So in the 11th hour, so roughly about lunchtime, they get an encounter, and it's going to be with giant badgers, potentially. These are hit die 3 creatures. They are medium size. They are semi-intelligent. So that's going to give them a basic 7. So D8 minus 1. So first of all, which of the barriers will they be trying to get through? And they will be trying to get through the one that the group couldn't improve. So it's a 4. So 7 plus 1, that's 7 minus 1, and they roll a 5. So these giant badgers push through this structure. They damage it a little more in the process as they come through. And do they surprise the garrison and the party? And with a 2, they do. Are they themselves surprised? With a 6, they are not. So they're going to get 2 rounds of attacks in. So now the question is, are they encountering a patrol of the troops, or are they encountering the party members that are in the party? So we're going to give that a 50-50. I'm going to break out D12 because I haven't rolled a D12 yet today. So 1 to 6, it's troops, and 7 to 12, it's the party. And it's an 11, so they encounter the party. So they come crashing through. They catch the group off guard. It's one rule that they can basically have their pick of targets. So we're going to pick the target for the first badger, rolling a D8 for the 5 party members. There's 4 footmen, but a footman's a footman. All right, so first one targets a paladin. They need an 18 to hit the paladin. And with a 2, that's a miss. So the second giant badger targets one of the footmen. And they're going to need a 14 to hit the footman. And with a 13, since they're charging, that's going to be a hit. And that will do. Okay, well, hold on. They actually get 3 attacks. So we know we have 1 attack with the heavy footman with a claw. But we're going to go back and try the paladin again. So a 15, that's a miss. 11, that's a miss. So going back to the heavy footman, the other claw, 18 is a hit. And the bite, an 8 is a miss. So that's going to be 2 hits. These are 1 to 3 points of damage. So I'll do a d6, divide by 2. So that's a 6, that's a 3, that's a 2, that's a 1. So 4 points of damage to the heavy footman, and he's down to 1 hit points. All right, the next badger targets one of the magic users. All right, now this magic user I was rolling up, instead of using the DMG guidelines for magic items for NPC parties you encounter in the dungeon, I actually rolled them up based on the min entry in the monster manual, where you get percent chance per level of certain types of items depending on what type of class it is. And this magic user had some pretty incredible, got a miscellaneous magic item, and it rolled up as an artifact, and it's the invulnerable coat of Arnd. So the overall armor class is 1, but it covers the upper arms, the torso, and the groin, and those areas cannot be hit. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to roll to see if there are hits to the armor class 1, and then I'm going to roll a die to see if it hits, for example, the head or the lower body. I'm going to give it about a 50-50 chance, because roughly half the body is exposed and half is not. So let's see, 3 rolls, armor class 1 overall, so we'll need a 15 to hit. So we got a 4, we got a 19, so that's a hit with a claw, and a 13 plus 2 for the charge. That's going to be a hit with the bite. Now, what areas did they hit? So I'm going to roll a D8. On a 1 to 4, it hit one of the invulnerable areas. On a 5 to 7, it hit one of the exposed limbs. And then on an 8, it went for the head. So here we go. We got a 2, so that claw just bounces off. And then the bite also bounces off. It just clangs off the invulnerable coat of Arnd. So now the final badger is going to be engaging another one of the heavy footmen. So again, needing a 14, a 5, a 5, a 2. So that's a miss. So second round of attacks. The one attacking the paladin, a 3, a 12, and a 10. So he can't get through the paladin's armor. The one against the magic user, a 17, a 4, and a 6. So one hit, rolling the D8, rolls a 2, clang off the invulnerable coat of Arnd. The heavy footman who was injured, a 20, so that heavy footman is dead. The other heavy footman, a 14, a 17, and then for the bite, a 3. So it's going to roll 1d3 twice, 1 point of damage, and 3 points of damage. So 4 points of damage. So one of the footmen is dead, and one of the footmen is down to 1 hit point. And now we go to initiative for the first round. So the party rolls a 1. The badgers also roll a 1, simultaneous. So let's go ahead and run through the badgers again. Against the paladin, claw 13, claw 2, bite 3. Against the magic user, claw 18, claw 9, bite 20. So what did the claw hit? Hit the invulnerable coat of Arnd. What did the... Okay, and now we caught a limb with the bite. So the bite is 1d6. So 1d6 points of damage against the magic user is a 6. So 6 points of damage on the magic user. That magic user only has 7 hit points, so down to 1 hit point. So the heavy footman, one is engaged with a heavy footman. 19, that's a hit. That heavy footman is also dead. That's 2 heavy footmen down. And now we have the one that was unengaged. So I'm going to roll to see what target this one picks. And with a 4, that is the cleric. So claw 4, claw 12, needs a 14 to hit the cleric, and a 17 with the bite. So that's a hit on the D6, rolls a 6 again. So that knocks the cleric down to 7 hit points. So 7 hit points for the cleric. So now the party goes. So first we'll strike back with the people who were attacked. The paladin strikes, rolls a 4, misses. The magic user, already engaged in hand-to-hand combat, has the dagger, rolls a 16, needed a 17. The paladin needed a 16. The cleric needs a 16. The cleric misses with an 11. In the heavy footman that is engaged, well, that heavy footman died. So the ranger moves up to the unengaged one and rolls a 20. So steps right up and attacks with that 20. And will be doing with his Nagamaki 1 to 6 points of damage and rolls a 5. So 5 points of damage to that badger. All right, let's line this up. All right, so now all the badgers are engaged with actual party members. So now the other magic user does not have any attack spells prepared. Let's see, he does have Ray of Enfeeblement. What did that do again? And I just realized he should not have that spell because he is second level. He should not have a second level spell as a second level character. So he's going to try to cast Light at the badger engaging his fellow magic user to see if he can blind him. And so the save versus spells for the badger is going to be a 16 on that. And rolls a 17, so the badger is unaffected by that spell. So now the two remaining heavy footmen move in, and they're going to back up the ranger since that badger has killed at least one of their fellows. I think both of their fellows. So they're going to back up the ranger. They need a 16 to hit. We got a 1, and we got a 1. So they are just fumbling all over themselves, I guess, with fear. So now we go to round 2. And at this point, there are people coming in to help. And these badgers are going to find themselves quickly surrounded once these troops move in. So first, we roll for initiative. The party rolled a 2, and now the badgers roll a 4. So the badgers will get one more good round of shots in before they get surrounded. So against the paladin, an 11, that's a miss. A 6, that's a miss. An 11, that's a miss. Against the magic user, a 17, that's a potential hit. A 15, that's a potential hit. And an 18, that's a potential hit. So, where did we strike? If any of these land, this magic user is down. So we roll a 5, that's a hit. A 7, that's a hit on a limb. And then an 8, that's a hit on the head. So, since their party, they can go down to -10. We're going to see how badly this goes for him. The claw, that's a 2. The claw, that's a 2. And the bite, that is a 3. No, I'm sorry. We don't have that. That's a 5. So 2, 2, 5, that's a total of 9. So -8 hit points for the magic user. Down he goes. So now the badger engaged with the cleric rolls, needing 14s to hit. A 2, a 17, and a 15. So that's 2 hits for a total of 2 plus 5. So that's 7 hit points, and the cleric only had 7. So the cleric is down to 0. So that's the healer down. So now we go to the one going against the ranger. A 19, which is what he needed to hit because the ranger has insane dexterity. A 15, which is a miss. A 12, which is a miss. And so that claw strike is going to do 3 points of damage, the maximum it could do. And that knocks the ranger down to 17. So now we'll do the party rolls. The paladin strikes back with a 1. And the Ranger strikes back with a 16, which is a hit for the Ranger. And the Ranger is doing 1d6 and rolls a 5, and that knocks out that Badger. So that's 1 Badger dead. So the 2 heavy footmen move over to where the cleric was and attack that Badger. Rolling a 2 and a 9. And then, let's see, the cleric's down, magic user's down. The other magic user does not want to engage in hand-to-hand. And so now this horde of heavy infantry from the fort who are on guard come rolling in. And there are 18 of these fellas. So let's see how many can get in on the action here. Oh, these guys are armed with pikes. So they can all pile in. They can pile in double layers. And they'll get to surround these guys, these Badgers, and just give them a good poke. I'm going to say the sergeant and lieutenant, seeing the magic user down, go to defend him. So we'll do them first. So they're going to need 16s to hit. It looks like I think all these guys need 16s to hit. So here we go. So 15 and a 5. And so now we're just going to do 6 for each of the Badgers from the other footmen. Since there's 18 of them, they'll split up evenly among the 3. So the Badger that's confronting the Paladin, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 17, that's a hit, 13, a 4, and a 20. So that's 2 hits and 1d12. Well, I'm going to get some action out of the 1d12 again. All right, so a 4 and a 7. So that takes down that Badger. So now the next group of 6 against the one on the magic user that was on the magic user. 16, 16, 5, 13, 20, 14. 3 hits. So a 10, and that's it. I don't need to roll those others because that knocks that Badger down. So then finally the one that knocked down the cleric. 17, a 14, a 15, an 18, an 18, and a 10. So 3 hits. So here we go. 7 points of damage, 4 points of damage, and that's enough. So the Badgers are killed in the 3rd round of combat by the swarm of troops coming in. And with that end of combat, the Paladin runs over to the magic user and attempts to use his laying on of hands ability to no avail. They are able to bind the wounds of the cleric, so the cleric will recover, but will be in a coma for 4 turns, and then will be incapacitated for a week. So, and of course, there is the matter of what will happen with that artifact, and that's something I'm going to ponder on because an artifact can be used by anyone. It's not class restricted. And I may have to create some lore that may affect how and who this can be utilized by. I'll have to ponder on that. And there are still 3 encounters to go in this day, but that combat took a while, and there have been some rather dire results as a result of that. So we're going to leave that until next time. Hope you enjoyed. The opening theme of this podcast was Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both from Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. If you have any thoughts or feedback, you can get in touch with me by leaving me a voicemail on my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. That's 864-209-1441. Or through SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. That's www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. Or you can send me a message or an audio file on Discord, where I can be found the Pink Phantom, or through email phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. That's phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. I don't have to play or read your feedback on the podcast if that is not your preference. Just let me know.